In this video, I'm going to share the quote secret recipe for my absolute favorite barbecue pork rub. And to be more accurate, this is actually my take on a copycat of my favorite store-bought pork rub, which is called Meathead's Amazing Smoked Pork Seasoning and Dry Brine. Now, if you've been much into barbecue ribs or anything like that, you've probably heard of Meathead because he shares a very popular pork rub on his website that is oft cited and oft repeated that he calls his Memphis Dust. And I've definitely used lots of the Memphis Dust. It's a very simple recipe and it's pretty good. But a while back, just for the heck of it, I went ahead and bought one of his pre-packaged store-bought pork rubs, thinking that it would probably just be the same thing as the Memphis Dust, but packaged up in a handy little container. It turns out that's not the case at all, and this is something quite a bit different than that Memphis Dust recipe that he shares. It's got more ingredients, and I think the proportions are a bit different, but this is by far my favorite rib rub, pulled pork rub, any kind of pork seasoning rub. This is my favorite. So after a lot of trial and error and a lot of analyzing and guessing quantities and proportions for each of the ingredients listed on the label, I finally came up with what I think is the closest possible match to the flavor of this Meathead rub. And that's exactly what we're making in this video. No, the color isn't exactly as deep of a red, and no, the grain size of the granulated ingredients aren't quite the same coarseness, but the flavor is incredibly close. And now I've been using this on basically all of my barbecue pork, including a pulled pork video that I'm releasing on the channel at the exact same time as this video, where I use a whole bunch of this stuff to make a couple amazing pork shoulders for my favorite pulled pork recipe. So if you want to see that, check that video out after watching this one. As for now, let's get right into it and start putting together this seasoning rub. And here's all the ingredients for our spice rub today. Real quick, we've got dark brown sugar, white sugar, smoked paprika, kosher salt, granulated garlic, coarse ground black pepper, ground ginger, granulated onion, rosemary, ground mustard, and yeast extract. And most of this just involves mixing all of these things together. But for a couple of these ingredients, we do have to take a small extra step just to make sure everything's the way we want it. And the first such step involves our brown sugar. Everyone knows brown sugar has some moisture content to it, so it really wants to kind of clump together. And that's sort of unavoidable unless you take an extra step like drying all of this out in the oven or in a dehydrator or something like that, which I have done, but in my opinion, affects the flavor and makes it taste a little weaker than I think it ought to. So what I like to do instead is just put all that brown sugar into a big metal strainer sifter thing and just kind of press it all through just to make sure that when it goes into my bowl, it can't really be lumpy in any way. Yeah, it takes a couple minutes, and yes, this step is totally optional, but I think it helps a little bit to keep it from clumping together before it even has a chance to mix with all those other ingredients, so I like to do it. And here we have what started as 3/4 of a cup of packed dark brown sugar. To that, we're gonna add 3/4 of a cup of white sugar, a 1/2 cup of our smoked paprika. And by the way, yes, this is to make a great big batch of this stuff that's gonna last me for quite a few cooks. If you wanna make a smaller batch than what I'm making here today, well, look at the printed recipe that I provide and cut it in half or in a quarter or in whatever ratio you prefer. Next, we've got 1/2 cup of kosher salt, 1/4 cup granulated garlic, 2 tablespoons coarse black pepper, 2.5 tablespoons ground ginger, 2.5 tablespoons granulated onion. Our next ingredient is our dry rosemary, and this rosemary comes in these little dried up sprig things, but we need that ground up. So for that, we'll use our handy spice grinder. And in goes 1.5 tablespoons of that ground rosemary. Then we've got 1 tablespoon of ground mustard. Now I wanted to stop and take a minute to talk about this next ingredient because it's a bit weird and I really had no familiarity with it until I was really examining and parsing the ingredients listed on the store-bought Meathead's rub. Now this stuff is called yeast extract powder. It's not the same thing as bread yeast that you buy at the store. It's not the same thing as nutritional yeast, which is a common ingredient in a lot of vegan food. This is something entirely different. Yeast extract powder is probably most famously known for a product that is not very popular in America, and that's something called Vegemite. Apparently the Australians can't get enough of it, and its really only ingredient is yeast extract. I've got it in powdered form. Vegemite somehow turns it into this horrific paste that I guess you smear on toast. But it's also used as a food additive. It's an umami booster and flavor enhancer. But hear me now when I tell you that you need to use this stuff absolutely sparingly. I had no idea what I was getting into when I bought this container of yeast extract. I bought it, and out of curiosity, I popped the lid off, took a big whiff out of the top, and it was a grave mistake because the smell of this is just the most putrid funk that you can imagine. But when you take about half a teaspoon of this stuff and mix it with about a mason jar worth of other strong flavors, it just does something to those flavors and enhances them and boosts the umami and just makes everything very tasty. But the container of just pure yeast extract, handle this with great care. Don't spill it anywhere. Don't use more than this just tiny amount for a large quantity of seasoning. That also took a little trial and error, and let my struggle benefit you and just take my word for it on that. And yes, of course, you could omit this ingredient altogether and the rub's still gonna be pretty good. Or you could replace it with a little bit of MSG or even mushroom powder or some other umami booster. My aim was to recreate the smell and flavor of the Meathead rub, and this is what helped accomplish that. Anyway, back to the recipe. And so in goes 1/2 a teaspoon of that yeast extract. Now it's just a matter of getting everything all mixed up. And no, I didn't necessarily really need this big bowl to do this step, but for the sake of the video, it kind of helped show everything that I'm doing. Plus, I like having a big bowl to work with when I'm doing that brown sugar sifting step. But I'll just kind of get everything folded together. There's a little bit of clumpiness with some of that ginger powder, and hopefully we won't have too much clumping from that brown sugar. Once it gets all mixed and incorporated with these other super dry ingredients, it doesn't tend to get too clumpy even after sitting for a while. But that's pretty much it. Now the only thing left to do is transfer this into a closable airtight container. And you could use a deli container, a Ziploc bag, some kind of Tupperware, but in my opinion, there's no better vessel for all of this seasoning than a good old mason jar. So we'll just get that all dropped in there. And there we are. Throw a lid on that thing and it's ready to go. And before each time I use it, I'll just give the jar a little tumble just to ensure that there isn't any clumping going on before I start trying to get any of that out of there. And I'm also seeing that on this camera screen, the color of this stuff looks quite a bit lighter on camera than it does in real life. I guess that's probably because of my camera settings and the lighting I have and stuff, but it's probably about, I don't know, 50% darker than what's coming across here on camera right now. Not that any of that really matters. You coat a piece of pork with this and slow cook it all day, it's gonna darken up anyway. All those sugars, that pepper in there, it's gonna look beautiful, it's gonna be delicious. So there you have it, my take on the Meathead's amazing smoked pork seasoning and dry brine. And if you don't really feel like buying all these different seasonings and making your own, just buy a bottle of this stuff. I'll put a link to it in the video description below. It is just delicious on any kind of barbecue pork or pork chops. I bet it would be great on chicken, but it just absolutely shines on pork. And of course, I'll put all of the quantities and proportions and ingredients in the video description as well, if you do want to recreate your own batch of this stuff. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future barbecue and smoking videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.